This is arguably the most humbling video I'll ever have to make. So a couple of weeks ago, I made a video about the modern military versus the rumbling, and I'll admit it straight up, I didn't do proper research and it turns out I was so wrong. So I thought, why not remake the video and go over exactly how wrong I was. With proper research this time and help from the comment section, I'll structure the video in the same way, first the Navy, then the infantry and artillery, and then the Air Force. The wind conditions in the video are still the same. Eren has to eradicate all life beyond the shores of Paradis, and the modern military has to stop the rumbling, but this time they can do it by any means necessary, not by killing every single colossal titan, because that's very impractical. There's a lot of other ways to do it. So even if we switch up the scenario and take political considerations into account, because last time I said that the whole world together couldn't do it. So even if we don't all unite in defeating the rumbling, the US military by itself should be enough to stop it. So let's go over what I said in the previous video and fix it. If we take out the landing ships, stuff like aircraft carriers and cargo ships which are just responsible for moving cargo and don't have any noticeable firepower, and the smaller patrol boats for the same reason. So this is completely wrong. What I used to think was that aircraft carriers are just glorified gas stations for planes, but this couldn't be farther from the truth. Aircraft carriers are more like entire military bases floating in the ocean. The biggest class of aircraft carrier in the US military is the Nimitz class. Technically there is one above it, but a lot of them are still under development and only have one carrier active so far. But even that one carrier has over 70 missiles on one ship. And even though a lot of those missiles are heat-seeking, surface-to-air missiles used to counter other missiles shot at the ship, I see no reason why the Navy could have just pointed in the general direction of the rumbling and start shooting, because believe it or not, the rumbling is actually pretty hard to miss. Other than that one big ass carrier that I just mentioned, there are 10 other carriers in the Nimitz class that precede it. One somewhat concerning fact that I read on Wikipedia, but I think it still applies, is that the carriers in this class have infinite range. With 66 missiles per ships and 10 ships, that's 660 missiles. Bear in mind that this isn't mentioning the 40 total phalanx machine guns spread across 10 ships, which can fire both armor-piercing and explosive rounds at 4,500 rounds per minute each, which is 45,000 rounds per minute. But the point of an aircraft carrier isn't even its firepower. Normally aircraft carriers are accompanied by a group of other smaller ships and a submarine to make sure the carrier is well defended. Also, the obvious thing, all the fighter jets on the carrier. But I'll talk about this in a second. All the specifics are in this comment, which I have no way of fact checking it, but it sounds pretty legit, so I'm gonna use it. But overall, the entire US Navy has 26,690 missiles, which if we lowball like our guy in the comment did, would take out roughly 16,000 wall titans. This is with the Navy's missiles and mines only. This isn't taking into consideration the Vulcan machine guns I mentioned before, or the smaller cannons that I talked about in the last video. With all those things combined, I think it would easily be more than 25 to 30,000 wall titans down by the Navy alone. Now, to quickly touch on the infantry, anti-tank missiles are a thing, which, considering that Eren with 2 sharp pieces of metal can cut deep enough into a colossal titan to hit the weak spot, would be extremely effective in taking out colossal titans walking in a straight line. It is literally impossible to calculate how many of these missiles there are, but I think it's safe to assume they would take out a very sizable chunk of the rumbling as well. Moving on, I want to talk about JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack Munitions. As far as my understanding goes, these are all kinds of miscellaneous bombs and missiles carried by everybody from the Air Force, Navy, and the ground forces. These missiles are everything from just normal launched bombs to laser guided and remote controlled missiles. There are variants from 500 to 2,000 pounds. In total, the US military has more than 500,000 of these miscellaneous bombs. Even if we lowball like crazy and say that all of these are 500 pounds and only 1 out of 3 launched land a kill shot, or it would take 3 to kill a colossal titan, that's 166,000 colossal titans, which is about a fifth of the rumbling gone. Now let's talk about the artillery. Even though in my last video I talked about how the M777 howitzer would be our best bet with the artillery, I grossly underestimated how much damage they would actually do, and more importantly, how they would do it. Despite the low rate of fire that I mentioned in my last video, the M777 would be able to hop back whenever they needed to with enough speed and efficiency to not get trampled almost immediately by the rumbling. This is because the shells, from normal shells fired at 20 kilometers to shells which are called fucking Excalibur that hit at double the range with more accuracy, would slow down the titans more than go for the kill. Rather than try to snipe out the weak spot from the front, they would try to go for as much AoE as possible, knocking titans over and slowing down the overall progress of the rumbling. Despite this, it would be pretty disingenuous to say that none of the shots from the M777 would be kill shots, so I'm willing to say that the M777s alone would take out 30,000 colossal titans. There are 2,000 Abrams tanks, 3,000 Bradley's tanks, and 400 LAVs, all of which have enough firepower to punch through the front of a colossal titan and snipe out the weak spot like it's wet tissue paper. This combined with the fact that they can hop back and shoot, effectively kiting the rumbling. If you want to make the accuracy argument and say that tanks can't snipe out the weak spot from the front, they could aim for the legs and the ankles of the Titans to slow them down like the M777s would. This slowing down argument will be really important later on when we talk about the Air Force. The ATACM is a massive rocket mounted onto the back of a truck with its own launching system, and the US has almost 50,000 of these missiles. Also, there's the portable missile systems that I didn't talk about in my last video. If we assume that even half of these missiles end up killing a colossal Titan, that's another 25,000 Titans dead. Now, onto the big one, the Air Force. There are a bunch of things that I missed which actually make it much more useful than I let on in the last video. Turns out the argument that I made about the planes not being able to fly close enough to the rumbling because of engine failure doesn't really apply, because heat dissipates exponentially through the air, and by the time it would reach altitudes that planes fly at, it would be almost nothing to worry about. Also, fighter jets aren't the only kinds of planes. Shocking, I know. Planes like the AC-130, which is a dedicated anti-ground aircraft, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, would do devastating damage. There are currently around 25 AC-130s with the US, but those 25 are more than enough to do considerable damage. They carry all of this per plane, which would carve a swath through the rumbling. Another minus 10,000, no debate. Another thing that I completely overlooked were attack helicopters. There are 150 Cobra and 750 Apache attack helicopters. Not only do these helicopters have 20mm rotary cannons and 30mm chain guns respectively, they also carry Hellfire anti-armor air-to-ground missiles, among other miscellaneous JDAMs that I mentioned before. And them not being able to fly in the hot air argument doesn't apply here either, because those Hellfire missiles are remote controlled. And if the helicopters were able to fly close enough to the rumbling to effectively use their machine guns, it would be absolutely devastating for Eren. Even if the machine guns aren't extremely accurate, the sheer volume of rounds being pumped into the rumbling would take out at least another 10 to 15,000. The rumbling's biggest weakness against these helicopters and the AC-130s is that the colossal Titans can't really do anything against them. They just stand there and walk in a straight line. So the helicopters can blow their load on them, go back to refuel and resupply, and just keep doing it over and over and over. With this in mind, the 10 to 15,000 number gets pumped up a lot, and if I'm being generous, I'll say like 40 to 50,000 Titans down. The thing that brings this all together is bombing runs. This is where the artillery slowing the rumbling down comes into play. After the Navy's exhausted all its missiles and torpedoes, they can't really do much once the rumbling gets deeper inland. So it's up to the artillery and Air Force to take it out. So let's see how it would all come together. The rumbling starts to surface on the beach and immediately starts to get peppered with shots from our tanks and M777s, slowing it down immensely. Then the AC-130s and helicopters come in and start eviscerating the colossal Titans, all the while being slowed down by the artillery. As the rumbling tries to push through all this, they start getting blasted with missiles from the ATACMs and other JDAMs. The only real problem for the military at this stage would be trying to avoid collateral damage, because trying to fly a jet or a helicopter would be pretty hard when it's literally raining explosives. As a cherry on top, if the ships managed to get out of the way in time, and even if they didn't, fighter jets and bombers would make bombing runs, which I mentioned before, showering the rumbling in explosives, slowing it down and killing the most amount of Titans out of any other strategy. Again, not by accurately sniping the weak spot, but with the sheer amount of explosives they could just dump on it. This isn't to say that sniping isn't a viable strategy, because some of the bombs and missiles dropped during these bombing runs are bound to be remote controlled. One modern day bomber jet can detonate nearly 30 tons of TNT worth of explosives in one run. Considering the rumbling can't destroy or disable any of these bombers, they could carry out these runs almost indefinitely until they run out of bombs to drop. With all this information, it just ends up being a matter of time before the rumbling is torn to shreds. Again, there's probably 100 different things that I didn't mention. Adding these things on top of what I just said, it ain't looking too good for Eren, I'll be honest. For the sake of fairness, I'm gonna ignore logistics because I ignored it in the last video, but even with logistics in the equation, I don't think the rumbling stands a chance. It would just take longer. Bear in mind, this is all considering that the rumbling has 550,000 Titans, or the 600,000 from my video. If it was what I like to call Willy's rumbling with tens of millions of Titans, or my theory of Ymir spawning infinite Titans, I still think the rumbling would take the W. If the rumbling was tens of millions of Titans, it would shift from a matter of firepower to a matter of endurance. And though the rumbling would take serious damage, being generous, the modern military could take out like 3 to 4 million Titans, but eventually all JDAMs and Tomahawk missiles and effective ammo would be used up. And even though the rumbling would be missing a fat chunk, it would still have enough to flatten the world. Honestly, 10 million Titans is a crazy amount of overkill. The amount of nukes needed to take out 10 million Titans would definitely cause a nuclear winter and cause too much collateral damage, meaning a victory for the rumbling. On the topic of nukes, one thing that I completely overlooked, and I can't believe I was this stupid, was that even if we say that too many nukes would destroy our society, we only need like 2 or 3. Even though in the anime it's never directly stated that the rumbling would stop if Eren was killed, it's a pretty reasonable inference to make, which I feel like I avoided as a form of cope. By dropping a couple of nukes on top of the founding Titan, we vaporize Eren and the rumbling would be stopped pretty easily. GG. Now that we've looked past the firepower argument, I want to look at other ways we could stop the rumbling. Considering how Eren wants to preserve life on Paradis and destroy life everywhere else, a pretty smart way we could stop the rumbling is by effectively holding Paradis hostage. Let me explain. Eren is taking all the Titans off of Paradis and using them for the rumbling, right? This leaves the island completely defenseless. I know 3 big walls aren't much of a defense against the modern military, but just hear me out. Now that the island is completely defenseless, we can just point a couple of nukes at it and tell Eren that if he doesn't stop the rumbling right now, we're gonna turn Mikasa, Armin, John, Connie, Hanji, Levi, and everybody else into ashes. Onto fire. And if he doesn't believe us, we can launch a couple of nukes at the rumbling just to prove that we could do it. Honestly, we don't even need nukes, just a couple of bombers I mentioned before could do the job. Another kind of stupid way we could stop the rumbling is by kidnapping Mikasa. Just hear me out. We put 10 dudes with the AR-15s and a crate of white Monster Energy in the helicopter, fly over the rumbling and book it straight to Shiganshina. As soon as we get there, we drop the ropes and yoink Mikasa Navy SEAL style. Armin can't do anything because the second he tries to stop us, we just shoot Mikasa. We tie her ass up, fly back over the rumbling, and threaten to throw her out of the helicopter. Eren either watches Mikasa die or is forced to pull back, putting the whole situation into a stalemate. One final way we can stop the rumbling before it even gets to our shores is to start blasting nukes at Paradis as soon as Eren sends out his message. Assuming that we count as subjects of Ymir in the modern world, as soon as we hear that the walls on Paradis have crumbled to the ground, we hit the big red button and immediately start dropping nukes at it. Sorry that this video didn't have as many calculations and fun stuff on my part. This is because, like I said before, most of the information I used came from comment sections, which is pretty sus when you think about it on paper, but it was just people stating facts and numbers, not their opinions. And they use normal logic and knowledge, which I didn't have, so I don't really see a problem in using that information. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe, share this video with your friends. Later.